Welcome, everyone, to Fostering Community Across Learning Modalities. I am Adrienne Phelps-Coco, and I am the Director of Gen Ed at Harvard College.
And I'm Victoria Kwame-Roden. I'm the Associate Director of Online Learning and Education at the Graduate School of Design.
We are very happy to be here today. We have some great panelists who we'll introduce in just a moment. But what we're really here to talk about today is how you can build community no matter how your students are participating, whether that's online, whether it's hybrid and you have students in different ways. There are a lot of strategies that you can use even if your courses look very different. So I wanted to kick things off today by thinking about why community matters. And I think that the session this morning actually was really fantastic in setting us up for this. There were a lot of great points made by the panelists that I think dovetail very, very well. So first of all, I think a lot of people think about community as being about well-being, and that is absolutely true. As we think about the loneliness epidemic that students are often experiencing, even faculty are often experiencing, community in the classroom can be a really great place to build that. But the community really goes so much. It has so much more power than just in student well-being. When we think about a sense of safety in the classroom, that is really what allows us to have those difficult conversations that can make real deep learning possible and can help all students feel like they matter, like they are capable of learning. That community really, really helps foster that sense. And then there's these sort of what often get called soft skills, which is a term I frankly hate. But there are a lot of skills that are about being able to work with other people. And especially as we think in a multimodal context in the world we live in, being able to connect with people across different modalities is a critical life skill. And being able to have those conversations in a civil way, being able to work together, all of this is an important part of learning, even if it's not the learning goal of your particular course. And then finally, there's a huge body of research out there that community itself actually enhances student learning across the board. So sometimes I hear from people who think, I teach math. Why do my students need to be in a community? They just need to solve the problems. They should be in a community because it will help them learn math in a better way. That research is abundantly clear. So when we think about community, what we're really talking about is learning. And so this matters quite a lot. With that, I'm going to pass things off to Victoria here to talk about learning modalities.
Absolutely. So part of the difficulty in what we're talking about today is that online teaching means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So when we talk about teaching online, when you say I teach online, that can mean something very different from one classroom to another classroom. So I'm going to touch on just a number of different modalities that people may or may not be teaching in when they say that they teach online. So one modality is hybrid fixed synchronous, which is the closest kind of to the residential experience. So that is a group of students coming together, some in a classroom or some online or all together, but they're meeting at the same time and they're all talking together. So there's kind of this direct communication that is all happening synchronously. There's also hybrid flexible synchronous, where a group of students and an instructor may meet together, but they'll choose a time. So a lot of the time this will happen if you have a group of working professionals, so everyone is not available at 3 p.m., it's not an undergraduate class, or you may have students that are in different time zones and you need to accommodate that. If you have a group of students in China that want to meet together, you don't want to have them meeting at 3 a.m. their local time. One of the big varieties of modalities that we have is hybrid asynchronous, sometimes called high flex. And so this is kind of a massive combination. So you may have a live lecture that is recorded. You may have students that are attending synchronously online when you have some residential students. And then you also may be recording this so that students can attend asynchronously. This can be super complicated to manage, and it may be mandated by your school. So that is just another modality that may be considered. And then you also have asynchronous, which, depending on your school, may be a dirty word, but it is fully recorded, fully accessible material that students can kind of do at their leisure. There may be deadlines, but you may have a week to watch some recordings to participate online. So lots of different modalities and lots of different ways. So if you teach a hybrid fixed synchronous class, you may not think that you have a lot in common with somebody who's teaching a fully asynchronous class. I get to do the disclaimers here. So if you're teaching online, not all schools have adopted policies around online and hybrid teaching, or they may have very strict policies. So if you teach residential courses at the college, your undergraduate students may not be allowed to go to an asynchronous course. So you want to make sure that you're following the policies of your school. Similarly, if you are teaching a HighFlex course, you must teach a HighFlex course. You don't get to opt out of the asynchronous portion of the course. So make sure you're following your school policies. I'm sure your administrators would love to talk to you about exactly what you may or may not do. Similarly, we're going to talk a lot about technology today. And technology can be a little bit sticky at Harvard. We have Harvard IT, which is kind of the overarching IT component of the university. But then different schools are resourced very differently. So your school may allow you to get kind of wild with whatever technology you have. And you may have a lot of financial resources or human resources to develop different technologies for your school. Other schools may have much more limited access to technology. So what we're talking about today is kind of general pedagogical approaches to teaching online, but make sure that you consult with your university IT as well. Ooh, sorry. Need a glass of water here. All right, so with that said, the boring technicalities out of the way, let's move on to actually talking to people who are in the field teaching online in various modalities.
Excellent. So before I bring our panelists up here, can we do a quick show of hands? How many of you have taught or supported an online or hybrid class in the past? All right, lots of people. How many of you have done that outside of the context of the pandemic? All right, actually quite a lot. So that's great. We've got a lot of experience here. And I will say the pandemic experience is really fantastic. It is very specific, for good and for bad, right? There were a lot of things that happened very quickly. So if your only experience with this is during the pandemic, these are a lot of strategies that if you're ever called upon to do this again, you might be able to do with a little bit more intention than, those of us who had to switch our courses over within a week or however long it was that we had at that point. But what we really want to kick things off with today is some experience from instructors. So if we can bring our panelists up here, we have Alexandra Sedlovskaya, who is the Associate Director of the Christensen Center at HBS, and also a lecturer at Harvard Extension School, and Natalie Slopin, who is the Associate Professor in Social and Behavioral Sciences at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. You guys can come and have a seat. Actually, I think we have, this is being recorded, so actually we can say hello to everybody who's on the recording as well as part of a multimodal experience. So we're going to sit together so we hit the camera. That is part of actually what you'd want to think about in a multimodal course is where is that camera and how are you framed? But we really wanted to learn a little bit about your courses and to think about some of the experiences that you've had. As Victoria pointed out before, online and hybrid can mean many, many different things. You should never, if someone tells you that they teach a hybrid course, your next question should always be, what does that mean to you? Because these are really very different in different contexts. So I want to start with that question to our panelists. Can you tell us just a little bit about what your course is and what actually does it look like? So let's start with Natalie here.
Sure. So the class that I'm talking about today is a requirement for our MPH students. It's a core class, and we offer it in 3 different formats. We have actually 2 different formats. We have a fully online version. So these are working professionals who are doing a degree part-time. And this offering online it could be completely asynchronous for those who do not want to engage in person at any time, maybe because of time zone. It's a very international program. And within that fully online class, we allow for synchronous engagement, though. So there's optional times each week that individuals could come and do an interactive discussion with the instructor. We also offer office hours live regularly as well. This class is an introductory class to social and behavioral determinants of health. I forgot to mention that part. We also offer it during the academic year for our residential students in a hybrid format. And what we mean by hybrid here is that they are seeing the online modules that we prepared for the online. So they're getting the large majority of content online. It's the exact same material between the two. But they also, instead of these optional engagements that we offer for the online version, they have to come in and have live engagement sessions. We cover the same material in their in-person engagements. So they're required to do a lecture session with me weekly, as well as small groups with their teaching fellows. And so when we offer this in the asynchronous format, basically in the place of in-person discussion sections, they're going to be getting the content through readings and then online discussion boards. And one thing we do to facilitate community for those who are asynchronous is sometimes we have the discussion boards with small subgroups of individuals within the class. So they could be talking and having conversations within a smaller subset than the large class, so they could get to know one another. So I'll leave it there for now.
Excellent. Yeah. I think what you've got is a really good example here of two different types of courses, one aimed more at that international audience, that professional audience, and then another for a residential audience, both which fit within this multimodal course.
Yeah, and I will add it's quite efficient because we created all this material that we're able to use for both an online format and a hybrid format.
Excellent. All right, Alexandra, same question. Tell us a little bit about your course.
Sure. And mine is actually fitting your definition, Victoria, the one that's very difficult to manage. I think you refer to it as that. Exactly. So my format is actually similar somewhat to what we have here, almost. So we have with us people live. So some of my students come live in person. What we're missing here is that some of my students are also live with us, but on Zoom. So we don't have that. And I also have another group who would be watching completely in recording. So I'm looking right at the camera, and welcome to everyone who is watching us on demand, which is what I would do in the classroom. So I have 3 groups of students. And by the way, the same student can engage across the course in all of these formats. So one day you could be in person, right, live. Another day you could be with us on Zoom, and if something happens, I see some surprised faces. You can also watch it in recording and then annotate the session, which we can talk more about that. Did you also want me to tell you more about the course or just the hybrid format?
Maybe just a little tiny bit about the course, just so they know what you're talking about.
Sure. So this is the course that I've been teaching actually for now. I'm trying to remember 9th year, I think it's going to be. So also before the pandemic, I saw a lot of hands who are teaching it outside of the pandemic. I was one of you when we got started, and it's a course on self and identity that I've been teaching. We've heard this morning about the importance of how we design the course that also can foster community. So my course is designed so we have obviously the live sessions that people can watch in recording. We also have asynchronous work that students, regardless of how they engage with the course, can communicate with each other asynchronously. And we also have opportunities for people to actually see each other live through optional group sessions, obviously office hours on demand, and we even have a group project, which a lot of times gets the reaction from the students. And then I have to be very purposeful in explaining why we're doing group project and how it's going to work for someone who is either on Zoom or completely asynchronous.
Excellent, excellent. So one of the things we know about community in these multimodal learning spaces is that it doesn't happen by accident. It really is something that takes some work to develop, and sometimes the strategies you use take strategies before the class, maybe things that happen on day one, things that then happen in an ongoing way throughout the semester. I tend to think of these as rituals of community. What are those things that you do in a repeated way to help build that and foster that community? Both in terms of the teaching and maybe in terms of the course design. So this time I'm going to let Alexandra kick this one off. I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what are some strategies you use to build community in your course?
Sure. And full confession, when I've learned about this format that is being available when I was just getting started, my first response was, no way I'm doing this. Anybody else felt that way? I'm just curious. Like, no, how are you going to do that? Because prior to this course, I've been teaching actually at Yale University. It was a very different experience, all residential, all in person, smaller classes, as you can probably imagine by the title of my course, Self and Identity. We do discuss sensitive topics, potentially controversial topics. So my first thought was, how am I going to be doing that? Especially, I don't lecture. So it's very much participant-centered. It's discussion-based. We do exercises. How am I going to do this across these different modalities? And I actually share that with my students, by the way, on day one. That I was like, no way I'm doing this. And here we are, right? I tell my students, like, ninth year running at this point. So why? And I think that gets to the question of how am I going to build that community? Because this format actually, as hard as it is to manage at first, at some point it becomes automatic. It allows us to bring together the much wider range of experiences, of perspectives, of viewpoints. I see some of you are nodding, which actually enriches our learning because we do now have this wealth of experience in our class. And I mentioned that on the very first day because sometimes we do have technological difficulties and sometimes it is more frustrating and it could be more time consuming. And so letting people know up front why we're doing this in the first place and the value we're all gaining can go a long way when we do encounter some of those challenges. And so before the course even starts, I send a class announcement. It actually used to be an email and now I've evolved into just a class announcement where I'm very intentional with the language that I'm using. So I welcome students into our course. I'm using it again very actively. I explicitly tell students, and I genuinely mean that I'm very interested to learn more about each of them. And I specifically ask them for the reasons why they're joining this course and the goals they have for our time together. And even if it's a required course, I still think it's really important for students to think about their goals for the course because I'm trying to transition them from passive learners to active learners. So not just receiving information and knowledge, but actually actively seeking knowledge and being responsible, not only for their individual learning, but also for our collective learning. So I do that ahead of time. And so we've heard this morning, it's not just important for them to be seen by us as instructors, even if you're teaching a large course. And I should add that my course is around 100 students. It's also important for them to be seen or heard by each other. And so I asked them to post a brief introduction on a discussion board. So I use Yellow Dig. And so before they even get to our class, whether synchronously or asynchronously, they will already have a chance to interact a little bit with each other. And then to create this continuous loop of learning from the very beginning, when we do show up on the first day of class, and then I'll stop after the first day of class. So because I feel like I am lecturing. So when we do show up on the first day of class, first of all, and I also have teaching assistants. I don't know if we haven't mentioned that. We will have created virtual backgrounds with the student name for every student. And we don't even know whether the student is going to show up in person or asynchronously necessarily or on Zoom, but every student will have a virtual background created. Why are we doing that? That's an effort we're showing to say, okay, if you're with us on Zoom, let's turn on our cameras, let's find our backgrounds. They have a link. They can change their names. They can create their own virtual backgrounds. But what that signals is that we've already taken the time. So now let's have those cameras on. And to me, that's a really important point. If you're teaching just online or in hybrid, cameras on to me really begets engagement, and that's another incentive. And then I will look at the screen and I welcome everyone. I'll look at the camera and I'll be very mindful to remember I have students who are not with us entirely, and I will give a huge shout out to everyone. And as people are signing into Zoom, just as if they're walking through the door, I'm like, oh my goodness, hi, so great to see you. So great to see you by the name because now I can see the names. So I'll take this time in the very first day of class and subsequently too, to make sure that everyone gets seen or at least acknowledged. Like we also have students with us who are not with us live, but I will say, I look forward for you to introduce yourself or to say hello, or here's a question. I'm looking forward to reading your annotations. So I really talk to everyone on that first day of class and subsequently. And then I take some pause, just like the way here. And like, why don't you all take a look around the room? Like, take a look around the room. Yeah, see, and I actually take that moment. I'm like, whether you're with us on Zoom or you're watching us completely synchronously, let's look around the room. And we can sense a little bit of awkwardness at first, like you were all not looking around either. And I say, look, you might not know each other, or we do not know each other well. But my aspiration and my goal is that we will pause again on the other side of the semester, and we always do, and we reflect on our time together, and it flies really fast. My goal is that we will think about the kind of community, the strong learning community that we've become, and then I plunge into like how we're actually going to do that. And then I go over some of the expectations and norms for us to get there. But to me, that pause to acknowledge that explicitly is really important. Okay, I'll stop here.
All right. Love that idea. Excellent. Natalie, what about you? Any strategies you use?
Thank you. Well, one thing I'm just going to mention is our hybrid version class came into existence because of student requests. So we actually had been running an asynchronous version of this core requirement for our in-person students, and they did not like that. They really did want to engage with each other, and that's what motivated us to have a lecture session as well as these small group sessions that are led by teaching fellows. I'll mention when we offer this course, it's been in many formats in my 4 years in my role here, but we run it in a short period. It's 4 weeks. And it's intense. They're getting our equivalent of 1.25 credits in a 4-week period. So there's not a huge period to get to know one another. So we have to be strategic and work early to build trust, because we are discussing things that could be sensitive topics for certain individuals in the room. So we also begin by asking students to share early, and I make an effort to try to respond to each one, and it's over 200 students, so it's really a lot. I'm doing that this week. And we do a survey to understand their interests so that we can form small groups with others that might have a shared interest for an in-class activity that takes place, for example. And I think the students do appreciate that preparedness and planning on our part. I also have to give our school credit. So for our fully online version, the students really do feel like a cohort going in. There's different times of year that I teach it, but I'll use an example of in the winter session, there's a cohort that arrives that knows each other really well, because even though they're asynchronous and they are taking classes from afar for most of the year, they meet in person a couple of times a year and they get to know each other, and they're really friends and supportive of one another, and I pick up on this. And that has made them interested in each other's work. So for example, the last time I taught this, they asked, can we have a place on our Canvas page where we can read each other's op-eds? Because they were curious what their peers put out. And I thought, what a great idea. So I just want to give the students credit for giving me as the instructor some suggestions on how to facilitate community and ways of knowing each other even better. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
I think that's fantastic. And so what I hear from both of you is that there is this intentionality around helping students be seen by you and also to be able to be seen by each other. And that those two things in combination really makes a huge difference and can be done in different ways depending on the modality, but that kind of core underpins everything. So I think that's fantastic. I was wondering what you have heard from your students about their experiences, because I know this is a lot of work. You're both putting a lot of effort into this. So does it pay off? Let's start with Alexandra here again.
Sure. And maybe that's another opportunity for me to mention how students engage also when they're asynchronous. So they're not just watching the recordings, they're also annotating the recordings as they're watching it. So they can provide their answers, they can make comments. And for me, that also means that I'm going to be giving implicit or explicit instructions to students. When I say implicit, I mean I will be looking at the camera. When I say explicit, I will say, okay, and if you're with us on demand, here's what I'd love for you to do if it's different, or I would just encourage it. Like I also look forward to reading what you thought about this or knowing what you thought about that. And what's remarkable in those annotations, students will spontaneously mention things like, and sometimes I pass it along to Adrian, but oh my goodness, every time you look at the camera, I sit up straighter. I like this one comment that said, it's so weird. It feels like the video will speak to me even though it's been recorded 2 days ago. And it's remarkable, right? I mean, I actually have the direct quotes. Or I cannot believe how seriously I'm taking this 2-minute pencils down assignment. I could have just paused the video, but I haven't paused it because I say, do not pause the video. Go with us, right? So it's remarkable and it's very spontaneous. And they actually say things like, I'm feeling very engaged, which to me, it's incredible. First of all, they're actually commenting their experience and they're doing it spontaneously. So I don't even ask that. Or it's amazing that I can participate But then it's also, for me, it's on me to bring their voices back into the classroom. I do explicitly tell my students who are with us live, I say, look, take the time to go back and read the comments that your students, right, our classmates are leaving, because they're commenting on your comments. It's very discussion based. And then I will also amplify those voices. So I will say, and by the way, John, and John, like, oh, my name got called, right? And I say, John, I'm really interested because you wrote X. And so what would you think about what Natalie just said about Y? And so even hearing your voice, hearing your name to be brought into the classroom, but it's a continuous loop. And they do say that they feel, which to me is really important, included, engaged. And we've heard today earlier, right, that engagement is that pathway to learning.
Can I ask a follow-up question? When you say students annotate your videos, can you say more about that?
Thank you. I promise that was not set up. I promise. Yes. So we actually now have, and I know this is where Adrian gave me a heads up that not everybody has that technology.
DCE specific, I will say. Yes, it's a DCE specific platform.
But I think there's a way around it.
People in this room.
Yes, but I think there is a way around it. And before it even emerged, I was doing something similar. So even if you don't have that access, it's the mindfulness, I think, around asking students. So they will be watching, and there will be space where they're watching, where they can actually provide their comments. Of course, we now have gone a step further, so they can even hit respond, or they can even do pair and share. So they will break up into pairs asynchronously. Again, this is maybe overly sophisticated if you don't have that technology, but you can still create those opportunities, even just say on a discussion board if you don't have it, or I would literally say, I'm really curious, how many of you think that hybrid classroom is the way of the future? And like, write yes or no. And the same way I would poll you here, I could say, and like, explain why. And I would literally give those instructions. And that's what I mean by annotate, because they can be watching and then immediately they will be, and when you're writing, it's time-stamped. So as an instructor, I can go in and I can actually see what they're responding to the specific moments in class. And they can also engage with each other synchronously as well. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? People like, no, but I'm not speaking up either. Yes.
What technology is this?
It's called the Immersive Classroom, and it's something that we built in-house at DCE because we do a lot of courses in this full HyFlex format, or we do live on Zoom. We lose the in-person fairly often, but we do live on Zoom plus the asynchronous, and it is quite challenging to teach. So we built a platform that auto-generates discussion boards and activities right where you need them just by talking to your students through the camera and having them push a button. So.
And you won't share?
We could share. It is built around a lot of very DCE specific technology it is highly integrated into a whole web of technologies. So anyone could, it is shareable, but not easily. And let me just, yes.
This is where resourcing
yes.
comes in.
Can I just make an offer that if you're interested in the technology, let's talk after. We can
Yes.
talk about like strategies and things, even if we can't share the technology.
Yeah, and let me just say, Gabe is a great person to get in touch with. They were one of the people who built this platform. So,
the only thing that I will say is, to me, while I am a huge fan of technology, it's actually a great reminder for the instructors to be mindful of the camera, to be talking to the students. So what it does, because it enables us to have students participate, the biggest part that the students are responding to is actually being remembered in the classroom, being able to hear your name or to have the instructions directed to you. To me, that's actually a huge part of them feeling engaged, even more than having an overly sophisticated or really cool technology, which again, I think it's cool, but I think it's a lot of it is pedagogy first.
exactly right. I think these techniques translate very well. They're harder to do, but they absolutely translate well even without the platform. Yeah. Let me look at
I've started it.
time here. That's all right.
As you can tell, right? I'm very
let's
participant-centered. I'm like, I'm not
let's get
lecturing.
into that. let's go for questions.
Another thing I was interested in, the idea of asking people to be on camera, that's something I've struggled with. And I totally agree, it's so much more engaging when people are up, and yet I want to be sensitive to some of the reasons why people may not feel comfortable with doing that. So I'm just curious about how you handle that.
Totally. And Natalie, feel free to jump in. So a couple of things. I think, first of all, the
In the spirit of multimodal, can you repeat the question?
Yes. So this is again the beauty of our classroom. Students just get magically heard. So thank you. And by the way, I also encourage that in my class. And so the question was, it's great when students are on camera, but there are certain challenges, and some of it could be also sensitivities for how do we make sure that students can, without demanding, I'm paraphrasing, have students turn their cameras on. And I do think that virtual backgrounds that we create in this way, it also equalizes somewhat so that students, first of all, they don't create their own backgrounds of what could be distracting, or some do have it, some don't have it. You can see the backgrounds are different. Here, that's one. Second, because we do invest our efforts, students like, oh, they really put this effort into creating the virtual backgrounds and the names are seen. So that's another. And a lot of it is also just human connection. So when I see those cameras go on, I'm like, what's your name? I'm like, oh, Melissa, welcome. And then I see the smile, and we are human, already built to respond to the smile. So you smile to me, I get so excited as an instructor, genuinely. So I smile back, and it's amazing. And I don't do that intentionally. I actually mean that, but it becomes this another motivator. And then never underestimate the power of social norms. So I'm a social psychologist. Social norms, even more than policies, do magic. And so if people are seeing that people are turning on their cameras, it becomes a norm. And then when someone feels that for some reason they will not be able to, I make a big deal. I'm like, I understand, Adrian, that you can't turn your camera on now. It's almost an exception now. I'm like, so do make sure you turn it on as soon as you can. So it almost becomes like a breaking of the norm, or somehow I actually make it clear, because once you have a preponderance of students with cameras on, the pressure is on, and then you're celebrating. They're like, it's so, and when people come in, I'm like, oh, it's so wonderful. I see Melissa. Well, I don't see you yet. I see you're signing on. Oh, now I see you. I see Gabe. I see, and you're kind of just pointing at people, right? And so that is magic.
Excellent. And I just want to pull things back here just a little bit. We're going to try to leave more time for Q&A at the end after an activity. But I do want to just, in the last few minutes of panel time here, Natalie, is there anything you've heard from your students? This is a lot of work you're putting in. You responded to 200 posts. What are you hearing about the impact that this kind of thing has?
I would say that our students have appreciated the opportunities that we create for in-person engagement. So for example, our online option that could be fully asynchronous, very often in our reviews, they discuss how happy they were to have the opportunity to have live engagement, and they're really grateful if they can have a one-on-one ability to talk with us in office hours. I also know that the students were really pleased to have discussion sections built into their hybrid version where the lectures were not enough. So initially we began by having 2 sections of 100 students each, where they just come and have a live session with me. And I would put them into small groups and they talk to each other. But I think that they wanted their voices heard by members of the teaching team, and they've been much happier since we have been able to create discussion sections led by teaching fellows for half of their live options, because it gives them more chance to share their own ideas and get feedback and hear their peers' ideas within the context of the teaching fellows as well. So I think when you have large classes, finding ways that everybody can be heard is really valuable, and that the students appreciate it.
I think that's great. And I think also this speaks to the power of in-person as part of a multimodal learning experience, right? When we're talking about this, multimodal doesn't just have to equate with online. That really figuring out how do we connect with these students in these different ways, build these different kinds of learning experiences that can draw on the best of these different ways that we can engage with each other. There is a lot of power here, and I think this is a very strong trend in education right now to think about how can we mix and match and come up with something new, and how are we going to continually evolve that as the world around us is shifting. So thank you to our panelists here. I'm going to pass things back to Victoria. We're going to launch a little activity here.
All right, so we're going to do some community building here.
Yeah. Thank you.
For our amazing panelists, thank you so much. We will have more time for Q&A after this. So we're going to do some community building, and we're going to have you think about how to build community in your course. So on the tables, there's a buffet of options for things that you could potentially implement in your course, depending on your modality and what works for you. And I want to kind of caveat this as well, just saying Pick one thing. Start small. If you want to revamp your entire syllabus and your entire course, go for it. But also, that is definitely overwhelming. So picking one thing to try and kind of testing that out and then iterating from there can be a great approach to actually starting community building in your course. So we're going to take 3 minutes to kind of review the document and think about your course. And then after that, we're going to take 5 minutes where you will turn to a neighbor, make a new friend, and kind of talk about your course and what you're considering in community building, and maybe something that hasn't worked in the past. Feel free to talk about kind of challenges and ways forward for your course. And then finally, we'll come back to the group. You can feel free to ask questions of the panelists or just kind of talk through your thought process as you select something to do community building in your course. If you need an accessible version, feel free to raise your hand and I'm happy to email one to you. Otherwise, we'll get that 3-minute timer to start reviewing going now. All right, everybody. We're going to start pulling everyone back together. I am glad that people are reacting sadly because it is great when people are having a good conversation. I'm going to open it up for a general Q&A for anybody who has questions for our panelists, anybody who wants to share out kind of questions or things that they're kind of chewing on for community building options in their course, or anything else you want to share and work on with folks.
Hello, Nicole. For those of you that cannot see me, I'm a 5'6"-ish brown-haired lady. I was just thinking about the idea of kind of on this piece of paper that was shared with us, the get to know your students with a survey. And I was reflecting kind of with our scenario that we were thinking about utilizing this. And are these surveys kind of used internally or the results shared out to further foster that community? I was just thinking of not like a trivia or, like how many students have cats or, something like that. I just was curious if you've done something like that.
So I've done both in my teaching. For this online class that I'm talking about, they were used internally only for me to understand who we are teaching and then to create small groups. I was just mentioning to the group I was part of, I've also used it to understand the expertise in the room. And we've actually built, for example, a panel of people with experience with op-ed writing based on learning. Because it is true that the classes are full of amazing people that probably could contribute to the content you're teaching. So it's great if there's ways to learn that early on.
I think sharing your intention with the surveys is also very important because I think if students are expecting kind of the safety of sharing it with teaching staff, but then not sharing it with a group, or if they do want to share things with a larger group, just stating intentions up front can be really helpful with those surveys.
Yeah, we've also created word clouds, for example, to tell the class about, the whole, not individually.
Hi, I'm Ileana. Nice to see everyone today. I think we've been approaching the conversation and the discussion assuming that people are not resistant. I think if you're teaching a class, students signed up to be in the class. But if this is more a environment like maybe a webinar or something lower stakes, what are some tips that you have for cultivating that community and that openness quickly when you don't necessarily have the planning time or sort of reaction time maybe to get people on board?
Just maybe to clarify, when you say resistant, you mean people who are participants or the instructors? Because I can imagine both.
Ooh, yeah, maybe both. I was thinking participants, but yeah.
I think to your point about how do you create an environment fast, I think that's probably the challenge too, especially if not everybody wants to do it that same way. And sometimes actually even if students sign up, for example, for a hybrid course, they might do it out of necessity. Like they actually prefer maybe to be in person, but they have to be either online or completely synchronous. And I think that's the question. But I almost commented from the perspective, again, of social psychology that we do have that fundamental need to belong. And we just need to figure out how to tap into it. And for me, like, first of all, just acknowledging, like the way I've done even here in this room. So let's actually just do this experiment quickly. When you just walked in, again, I asked you to take a look at each other. Like, you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. Like, and you're gonna feel like, wow, that's kind of awkward. And now you're like, I see there's some nervous laughter, but now you actually had a chance to spend talking in groups. I mean, it could also be in online, it could be breakout groups. It could be another way, and this is back to this idea, Adrian, of you don't have to be seen by me as an instructor, you could be seen by other fellow students, or not even seen, but maybe just chat or type other ways. But hopefully, even now, within this very short period of time, it really feels like, oh, I actually got a chance to talk. I got a chance to know, like, I actually got a chance to know my table much more. And so there might be already feelings strong, and not, oh, wow, we're bonded now forever. But there's already, right, this idea of community, but doing something meaningful and quickly. My other issue is like, let's do it quickly. The longer you sit passively and just the longer you listen, the more you're in the role of just passive recipient. Like, this is not, and I tell myself, this is not Netflix. And so nobody's just watching stuff. So immediately I'm like, and I call someone either online or on Zoom or to start a conversation so that even though they feel like they're in their own space, which is also hard, all of a sudden like, you break to reality, like, oh, what do you think? And it could be, if you're on webinar, it could be a question you pose and you look at the responses and then you actually comment on some of the responses. But doing it quickly and making sure that you create these opportunities for people to connect to each other, I would say those are the strategies.
And if I can add just one more here, and this is actually one we used today that I just want to highlight, different people process things at different rates. And so sometimes having that, you're going to put people into small groups or you're going to ask them to engage, giving them 1 minute to think or 1 minute to write can really help people, especially people who are a little bit more introverted, have that time to process so that they are then able to engage fully in the activity or the conversation. So that can be another strategy that can help just a little bit.
I just wanted to, I was mentioning to the group here, I was in a training that was online, and the norm of the class was cameras had to be off. And I think part of it was to teach all of us how to present without cameras. But, and I was like skeptical that it would be successful, but when I was done, it was very successful and it kind of blew my mind. And the reason was, the norm was that cameras off, but the norm was also that you're engaged at all times. And so every 5 minutes or however long, they would do an activity like use the whiteboard and take a little space and write your thoughts using like a minute. And then there's like everybody's materials up there and they talk about it. So, and if you left, you had to like click the coffee button. It was web. It wasn't Zoom. It was that other one, WebEx. But anyway, so like they always knew that you were there, and that was the expectation. And as a presenter during the pandemic, having to go from in-person trainings to Zoom trainings, it kind of like freed me up. It's like, oh, Zoom can be okay, and the engagement's important, but the camera isn't necessarily important. Is what I came away with it. So I wanted to share that. And hear your thoughts, sorry.
It doesn't, actually, for this session, I don't think you have to have a question mark at the end. I mean, I think, right, we're not the dedicated like experts for the room. I mean, we do have experience. It doesn't have to be a question. If you want to share an insight or a comment, I would welcome, of course, that too. And I also just want to highlight pauses. Like, notice how we don't just jump in to fill space. We ask and then we'll wait. And like you just volunteered the really important insight about the role of interactivity, that it doesn't necessarily have to be visual interactivity. It could be other ways to interact. But we allow pauses. And I think a lot of times as instructors, we feel uncomfortable with awkward pauses. And so we jump in instead of waiting for the students to take that space. So thank you on both of those fronts.
I thought on that last anecdote that Shan shared, it I guess it goes back to what the instructor is trying to do, and because I think turning the cameras off does lower inhibitions in terms of class participation, but it also does maybe a disservice to fostering community. So I think it depends on the strategy of the instructor, maybe.
And I think I just want to highlight here, right, that it's also not just about us as instructors. So, for example, I am guilty. Like I said, I'm trained in social cues. So for me, they're really important. Like, I'm like looking in the room, like I see a question percolating. I'm seeing some hesitancy here. So I actually get a lot of information through facial. So to me, like having cameras off just almost like disengages some part of the language. But it's not just about the instructors, right? It's also about the students. And I tell that to our students too, that if someone is relating the story, and you're not either nodding along, not in agreement, but in processing, or it's very discouraging for people to share or to put ourselves out there if everybody else, like, not paying attention. So it's not just about us. It's also about, and I tell the students explicitly, it's about supporting each other as we make ourselves vulnerable, we take risks. So in that sense, it might be a little bit challenging. But then I also see students supporting each other through chat, like, oh, thank you for raising this. So there are other ways to do that. But I think as long as we're mindful of both students supporting each other and the faculty supporting the students, that could be really important.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us this morning and think about community building in your course or courses that you are helping support. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time out of their day to share their learned experiences with us and answer some great questions and some thought-provoking comments.